In this video, we're going to put the final nail in the coffin on the topic and really highly debated issue of whether or not Michael is Jesus. We are going to unpack Second Temple literature about Michael and archangels. We're going to cover the New Testament references to archangel in 1 Thessalonians 4:16, Jude 9's reference to Michael the archangel contending with the Satan, and also Revelation 12 with Michael and his angels fighting against Satan and his angels. And all together, we're going to end the debate on whether or not Jesus is Michael the archangel. In part one of our two-part study on the archangel Michael in the Dead Sea Scrolls is that we focus on Robert Eisenman's translation of the vision of Amram that equated Michael with the Old Testament Messiah. However, we saw that this is his insertion as it's not part of the retrieved scroll fragments, and when we look at other corresponding scrolls, is that other and better messianic titles were available and had a higher chance of being the original one used by the Qumran writer. And these at least had scriptural support to them. At the end of the day, all that we could gather from the first 4 Dead Sea Scroll texts was that Michael typically was grouped together with other angels. But we could tell that the Qumran community looked at him with a higher degree than other angels in their texts. To finish this study is that where we are going to look at Michael's involvement in 1st Enoch. In addition to this is that we are going to contextually address the 3 New Testament passages that both Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists turn to when they present their case of linking Michael with Jesus. How it typically goes is with Revelation 12:7 with Michael and his angels fighting against Satan and his angels. Then they'll bring up Jude 9, bringing up an archangel, and in this case, this is Michael as the archangel. Then they'll bring up 1 Thessalonians 4:16 that says when Jesus returns that he will come with the voice of the archangel. So they are trying to dot connect these 3 in your head together to equate Jesus with Michael. Along with this is that they might even bring up Revelation 19:19 and Matthew 24:31 in support of their position, as those describe Jesus' return with angels. Yet, Revelation 12:7 says Michael and his angels. The stressor here is all about the possessive statement of his angels in all 3 verses. So, what we should do is just stop here and deal with this one really quick. The logic is simple on the equator's part. If the text says his angels, therefore the character must therefore be the same person. Okay, but let's look at other verses that say his angels and see if this is lining up with reasoning, if this line of reasoning stands up, or one that the equator might want to give up on using by starting in Job 4:18, as these angels are clearly described as God's angels. So, playing by the same logic is that Jehovah's Witnesses must conclude that Jesus is God. It's the same approach they just did, and I'm sorry that I'm not sorry that you don't get to punt when your own mode of reasoning doesn't agree with your conclusion. Now, an SDA is saying, that's why we say Jesus is God, but also Michael. Okay, let's see how far that stands up. Next up is Psalm 91:11. For he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways. Now, why this should sound really familiar to everyone is because Satan quotes it to Jesus during the temptation scene. So, what's the significance here? Well, it's the fact that his angels in Psalm 91:11 are in reference to God the Father's angels, not Jesus. So, by using the same logic of equivocating the characters, is that Jesus is now God the Father. Of course, neither SDAs or Jehovah's Witnesses will say that, but this is exactly the same thing they did with Revelation 12:7. So, a person could easily do the same continuation of their line of reasoning to present a modalist case that equated the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit all to Michael. Nobody is going to agree with this, but it's still on the same line of reasoning that they just got done doing themselves. So, Jehovah's Witness or SDA, is that you're going to object to this dot connector, then I get to object to this one as well. And that it's inconsistent and deliberate on your end to show only certain verses and portray them in a way to make Jesus Michael while totally avoiding the rest. Now, don't worry, we will address the 3 New Testament verses in full. And although you might think the score is still 0-0, is that it's not, with Daniel's references to Michael in chapters 10 through 12, is that 12:5 through 6 came across our plate the other day to let us know that there were 3 heavenly figures before Daniel at the river. And when you break down the descriptions and dialogue, is that you realize that Michael is standing on the other side of the river after helping Gabriel get away from the prince of Persia, while the glorious man, i.e. Jesus, is on top of the river waters. The equator cannot overcome this in a debate other than by simply avoiding the context and descriptions. Nevertheless, it's to each side's benefit that we finish out our Dead Sea Scroll Michael study by diving into the relevant first Enoch verses. Now, the first thing to note here is that the book of Enoch is composed of 5 books itself, much like we would say that Moses' 5 books of the Torah or Pentateuch. For our purposes here is that only 3 sections have Michael and or other named archangels in the text. What also needs to be stated up front is that the Book of Parables section has no current Enoch scrolls found at Qumran of it, and that the Book of Parables is not found within any of the Greek manuscripts of Enoch either. So, there's an open possibility that the Book of Parables is a Christian interpolation, with some scholars even dating the Book of Parables as late as 270 AD. Now, if so, is that it would provide us with a very early Christian viewpoint of who Michael is. But it can be shown that the book, if it can be shown that the book was composed prior to the New Testament, then it's a good indicator that the book originated at Qumran or even before the Maccabean revolt. For the New Testament is that the composition of the books is largely accepted today to be completed by the end of the 1st century AD. And most of the books do come composed within decades of the cross. Scholar F.F. Bruce says that the amount of evidence available to establish a 1st century date for the composition or the completion of the New Testament is so great that it cannot be reasonably denied. And so, this is why most conservative scholarship will date all of the books other than John's works before the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem. Whereas, Critical scholarship will give much wider ranges and later dates to all of the books. Regardless, is that with the late dates, is that the book of parables still comes after the New Testament composition in this viewpoint, which would mean that we should easily tell if the parable writer saw Michael and Jesus as one and the same figure, and how they interpreted the three debated New Testament passages. On the other hand, is if the parable section is recognizable as being pre-New Testament, is that we should again be able to pick up on if the writer saw Michael as the promised Old Testament Messiah or not, and if the New Testament picked up on that line of thinking too. And why that should be easily discernible in this section is because Michael appears a lot in this section, along with the Son of Man figure from Daniel 7. And there are plenty of places where both of them are in the same text and context. Now, I'm sure that was a lot to digest. And just trying to wrap your head around all of the composition possibilities and the if-then questions associated with them can be overwhelming. So, if you need to go back and watch this introduction again to really lock it in, please do so, because they are all of the potential questions that we must have answers to have a definite end conclusion in this debate. And to any other equator out there, is that if all of those questions are answered with a no in equating Michael with the Messiah, then I'm sorry, you have no more legs to stand on in this debate. So let's begin building our first Enoch Michael understanding in the Book of the Watchers section, where chapter 6 sets the scene for Michael's entrance in chapter 9. Here we'll just read some selected verses out of chapters 6 through 8. 6:1. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. This should ring a bell, as it's pulling right out of Genesis 6, 1 through 2, almost verbatim. Enoch 6:1 says that the daughters were beautiful, which is the description in Genesis 6:2. But the important piece is that Enoch is clearly interpreting Genesis 6's sons of God as heavenly beings who procreated with the female earth dwellers to produce the Nephilim, i.e. the giants. Sidebar here is that Josephus also took the angelic view on Genesis 6, 1 through 4. So, if you were looking at the Second Temple period, is that you have both Josephus and the Essenes taking the angelic view. For Josephus is that he very likely came from a Pharisaic background, but there's nothing that definitively loops him in with them. Paul said in Acts 23:8 that the Sadducees don't believe in resurrection, angels, or spirits, but the Pharisees confess both. So, I think there is a strong chance that the Pharisees took the angelic view like Josephus did until their rabbinic movement occurred in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. This then begs the question about the New Testament writers. That we will see here shortly by continuing on in our first Enoch chapter 7 and 8 descriptions that are very short. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go into unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh, and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art working of them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all of their ways. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, Armoros the resolving of enchantments, Barakil taught astrology, Kababel the constellations, Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds, Erekil the signs of the earth, Shamziel the signs of the sun, and Cyril the course of the moon. Breaking in quickly here is that the earth is so corrupt because of the angelic rebellion and their giant offspring, which the chapter ends saying, "And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven." So what we have here is men upon the earth praying to God for help because the fallen angels are polluting the earth so bad. Enter Michael. And then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. The big observant piece here is that the Enochian writer put 4 angels together in the scene for us. To me, this is no different than what we saw in part 1 of our study with 4Q285 or the War Scroll in 1QM. And what I said there was what the scroll writer was doing was working off of Daniel 10:13's angelic princes that Michael is one of. And to me, this makes the most sense with the Enochian writer here as well. Where exactly did the Enoch writer get the other 2 names from? Nobody can say for sure. But we do see Raphael in the book of Tobit 20 times. Continuing on. And they said to one another, "The earth made without inhabitant cries the voice of their crying up to the gates of heaven. And now to you, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men make their suit, saying, Bring our case before the Most High. And they said to the Lord of the ages, Lord of lords, God of gods, King of kings, and God of the ages, the throne of thy glory standeth unto all generations of the ages, and thy name holy and glorious and blessed unto all the ages. Thou hast made all things, and power over all things thou hast. And all things are naked and open in thy sight, and you see all things, and nothing can hide itself from you." I'm going to break in here for a moment because this clearly shows what the Qumran community's understanding of who Michael is not, as we just saw that these 4 were discussing the outcry from the earth amongst each other. Then, collectively, they went and petitioned to God, indicating that the Enochian writer did not equate Michael with God. And if you're an SDA out there who believes that Jesus is the eternal creator God, and also Michael, is that they, the Jewish community living 200 years or more before Christ, would say you are dead wrong. In chapter 10, the Most High responds by giving each of the four orders as to how to handle the situation, which again shows the distinction between God and Michael in the community's eyes. And God tells Michael to go bind Shemjaza and his associates, who have united themselves with women so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. So the sons of God were bound up just like they are stated to be in 2 Peter 2:4, and kept there until the eschaton at the day of the Lord, where their final judgment will be rendered. This description is also found in Jude, verse 6. Now, Jude also said that these angels left their first estate, their own habitation, meaning heaven. This is the exact description that is found in Enoch 12:4, where he describes the angels as watchers, a Daniel 4 term. This abandoning is also described in Enoch 15:3. So, I personally think that it's obvious to see the same descriptions in Jude and 2 Peter as here in 1 Enoch. That should put the New Testament writers in the angelic view camp and fully shows that it was the dominant view in the Second Temple period. And this helps answer who are the spirits in prison found in 1 Peter 3:19 through 20 that were disobedient during Noah's pre-flood days. And the simple reason why any reader of the Old Testament would know that the sons of God are referring to angels is because in Job, they are clearly heavenly beings that came before the Lord and are explicitly referred to as the morning stars, i.e. angels, in Job 38:7. Now, back to Enoch 10:11, where Michael was given this marching order by God to bind the rebellious angels. The thing to note here is that Raphael was also told to bind Azazel, where he too is said to be kept in darkness until the day of the Lord. The interesting thing here is that one of the two goats on the Day of Atonement was for Azazel. Many versions will say scapegoat, but there are scholars like Dr. Michael Heiser who see a proper name here, and with that is that this provides the source for the Enochian writer of Azazel, the leader of the rebellious angels. Now we're going to move ahead to chapter 20, because in that chapter we get a breakdown of job duties that Michael has, and also for other angels too. Enoch 20. And these are the names of the holy angels who watch. Uriel, one of the holy angels, who is over the world and over Tartarus. Raphael, one of the holy angels, who is over the spirits of men. Rachiel, one of the holy angels, who takes vengeance on the world of the luminaries. Interesting note here is that Tartarus is actually the Greek word here for hell, but there are translations that will say Tartarus in them. Continuing on. Michael, one of the holy angels, to wit, he that is set over the best part of mankind and over chaos. Sirakel, one of the holy angels, who is set over the spirits who sin in the spirit. Gabriel, one of the holy angels, who is over paradise and the serpents and the cherubim. Remiel, one of the holy angels, whom God set over those who rise. Another interesting note here is Gabriel's station over paradise. This term is found in the New Testament 3 times, with the most famous of them coming from Jesus to the thief on the cross. Now, collectively, you likely picked up on that there were 7 angels listed. Biblically, we know that only Michael and Gabriel are directly named in the Bible. But the idea of there being 7 archangels finds its roots in 1 Enoch, as Uriel is directly called an archangel, like Michael is in Jude 9. In the book of Tobit, Raphael is the lead angel in this story, but in chapter 12, it says, he is one of the 7 angels who stand ready and enter before the glory of the Lord. This should sound familiar, as Revelation 8 has 7 angels that are said to be standing before God who are about to receive the 7 trumpets. So, it's very possible that John's description is the same thing that Enoch and Tobit had described. Now, for a couple of Daniel-related nuggets, here is that these angels were described as watchers. This description is only found in Daniel 4, with angels being called watchers. The Enochian writer is using this description with these 7, but he also did that with the Genesis 6 sons of God, who produced the Nephilim. So, the Enochian writer here again ontologically equates Michael with all the rest of the watchers who are created beings. Thus, he is not God in the mind of the Qumran community members. And this flows right into the next Daniel-related point. All 7 of these are described as one of the holy angels, which is exactly how Michael is described in Daniel 10:13 as one of the chief princes. The connection and interpretation by the Enochian writer here of Daniel 10:13 is obvious. Michael is ontologically and categorically just like the other 7 archangels, which the Enochian writer described in these 8 verses as watchers and as a special set of 7 angels that he got from Daniel's descriptions in chapter 4, verses 13, 17, and 23, and in 10:13, that provide the basis of why the writer or writers referred to Michael as a watcher. In chapter 24, the Enochian writer refers to Michael in verse 6, where he has Michael saying to Enoch the following. And Michael answered, saying, This high mountain which thou hast seen, whose summit is like the throne of God, is his throne, where the Holy Great One, the Lord of glory, the eternal King, will sit, when he shall come down to visit the earth with goodness. This is Michael flat out saying, I am not God. So, sorry SDA listeners out there, the Qumran community is not in support of your view. Now that was everything about Michael from the Book of the Watchers and Astronomical Books sections. So, all that we have left is the Book of Parables, where Michael is brought up quite a bit. As said before, is that this book is the most debated on and has a wide range of speculation for dates of its composition. Regardless, is that this is long before Constantine on either end. So, an SDA or Jehovah's Witness can't play some type of pagan Roman church conspiracy card here. And the quick overshot here is that you can see that Michael is in this section from the beginning to the end of it. What makes this section so valuable to us, and why it's debated on a lot, in the scholarly world that is because the Son of Man figure from Daniel 7 is spoken about a lot in this section, and without question is viewed as the Old Testament promised Messiah. And as you can see, is that there is overlap with both Michael and the Son of Man in the final chapters. So, it's going to be obvious whether or not the Enochian writer equates them, or if he clearly sees them as two distinct individuals. So, starting with Michael in chapter 40, verse 1. And after that I saw thousands of thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. I saw a multitude beyond number and reckoning, who stood before the Lord of spirits. This is without question taken from Daniel 7:10 with the Ancient of Days. Continuing on. And on the four sides of the Lord of spirits I saw four presences, different from those that sleep not, and I learned their names, for the angel that went with me made known to me their names, and showed me all the hidden things. So, Enoch is going to get their four names, and in verse 9, he gets told that they are Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Phanuel. It's interesting that Phanuel has taken the place of Uriel here, and nor was he in the list of 7 angels in chapter 20. Regardless, is that we do have Michael in this list. Now back to verse 3. And I heard the voices of those four presences as they uttered praises before the Lord of glory. The first voice blesses the Lord of spirits forever and ever. And the second voice I heard blessing the elect one and the elect ones who hang upon the Lord of spirits. I'm going to break in here because this scene places the 4 angels praising the Lord of spirits and the elect one. This means that Michael is praising the elect one, that I'm sure we all know who this is from Daniel 7. But I'm going to let the text speak for itself. Now, before chapter 40 is that in chapters 38 and 39 is that we see the elect one is also called the righteous one. So, keep those two titles connected in your head. Now, moving ahead to the start of the second parable in the book, is that in chapter 45, we see that the elect one will sit on the throne of glory after the eschaton. Again, all of this is Daniel 7 language. Now, 46:1. It says, And there I saw one who had a head of days, and his head was white like wool. This is also taken from Daniel 7:9 with a description of the Ancient of Days. Continuing on. And with him was another being whose countenance had the appearance of a man, and his face full of graciousness like one of the holy angels. Notice that we have another being who has the appearance like that of a man. This is similar to Ezekiel's throne chariot vision with an appearance of a man sitting on the throne. Back to verse 3 of chapter 46. This is the Son of Man who has righteousness, because the Lord of spirits has chosen him. So, we know definitively that the elect one is the Son of Man that is receiving praise from Michael, thus showing a clear distinction between the two. And just in case you think they somehow played a switcheroo here in the scene, is sorry, because look how the book of parables finishes in chapter 71. And it came to pass after this that my spirit was translated, and it ascended into the heavens, and I saw the holy sons of God. This, once again, is the Enochian writer defining the sons of God as angels, not human. Continuing on. They were stepping on flames of fire. Their garments were white, and in their raiment and their faces shone like snow. And I saw two streams of fire, and the light of that fire shone like hyacinth, and I fell on my face before the Lord of spirits. And the angel, Michael, one of the archangels, seized me by my right hand, and lifted me up and led me forth into all the secrets, and he showed me all the secrets of righteousness. So, there's Michael once again on the scene, taking Enoch on a tour. But you can see that the Enochian writer described him as one of the archangels, not the sole archangel. Although there are brackets here, and is that one might think that this is R.H. Charles' insertion into the text, is that the modern 2012 Hermania translation of Nickelsburg and Vanderkamp include this in theirs, indicating that they hold this as the original wording of the writer. Continuing on. And he showed me all the secrets of the ends of the heaven, and all the chambers of all the stars, and all the luminaries, whence they proceed before the face of the holy ones. And he translated my spirit into the heaven of heavens, and I saw there, as it were, a structure built of crystals, and between those crystals tongues of living fire. This translation of Enoch going into heaven might be familiar to some, but maybe not familiar to many of you. But what the Enochian writer just did was reference and use Genesis 5:24's description of God taking Enoch to heaven without ever dying. This is also found in Hebrews 11:5. The only other place where Enoch is discussed in the Bible is in Jude 14-15 that says, "And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Two pieces of these verses are found in 1 Enoch. The first is with Enoch described as the seventh from Adam. Yes, we know that Enoch is eighth in the Genesis 5 genealogy, but having the exact same wording cannot be denied. As the second piece is the prophecy itself that matches Enoch 1:9 verbatim. There are no instances in Genesis 5 or anywhere else in the Old Testament that quotes Enoch saying anything, let alone all of this. The closest you can get is in Deuteronomy 33:2, where Moses said that Yahweh came with 10,000 angels when he gave Moses the law. But the rest is totally unique to Enoch and Jude, thus showing that one of them is using the other. And for right now, it's tilted more that Jude is using Enoch. And since chapter 60 falls within the parable section, is that the composition date now looks to be pre-Christian and not late 3rd century as some have it. But we'll come back to this topic after we see what the rest of chapter 71 of Enoch says. Verse 6. And my spirit saw the girdle which girt that house of fire, and on its four sides were streams full of living fire, and they girt that house. And round about were seraphim, cherubim, and ophiphim, and these are they who sleep not, and guard the throne of his glory. And I saw angels who could not be counted, 1,000 thousands and 10,000 times 10,000, encircling that house. Again, I hope you can hear Daniel 7:10 in all of this. Continuing on in verse 8. And Michael and Raphael and Gabriel and Phanuel and the holy angels who are above the heavens go in and out of that house. And they came forth from that house, and Michael and Gabriel and Raphael and Phanuel, and many holy angels without number. And with them the head of days, his head white and pure as wool, and his raiment indescribable. And I fell on my face, and my whole body became relaxed, and my spirit was transfigured. And I cried with a loud voice, and with the spirit of power, and blessed and glorified and extolled. And these blessings which went forth out of my mouth were well-pleasing before that head of days. And that head of days came with Michael and Gabriel and Phanuel and Raphael, thousands and 10,000s of angels without number. Here, Michael is clearly getting grouped together with the regular myriad of angels. And before this, 71:3 said that Michael took Enoch by his hand and showed him around heaven. Again, Michael is grouped with all the other angels 2 times in verses 8 and 9. And verse 13 is quite clearly playing off of Daniel 7:10. So, as we are seeing the Enochian writer use Daniel 7's vision for his backdrop, is that the next piece in the scene is the arrival of the Messianic Son of Man figure, who is described coming before the Ancient of Days. So, what do we have next in Enoch? Verse 14. And he came to me and greeted me with his voice, and said unto me, This is the Son of Man who is born unto righteousness, and righteousness abides over him. And the righteousness of the head of days forsakes him not. And he said unto me, He proclaims unto thee peace in the name of the world to come. For from hence has proceeded peace since the creation of the world. And so shall it be unto thee forever and forever and ever. And all shall walk in his ways, since righteousness never forsakes him. With him will be their dwelling places, and with him their heritage. And they shall not be separated from him forever and ever and ever. And so there shall be lengths of days with that Son of Man. And the righteous shall have peace and an upright way in the name of the Lord of spirits forever and ever. And so ends chapter 71 in the Book of Parables section. So, we do get the arrival of the Son of Man figure, just like in Daniel 7:13, who is clearly the messianic figure in the Enochian writer's description. And more importantly, for our purposes here, was clearly distinct from Michael. Daniel 7:13 said that they brought the Son of Man before the Ancient of Days, which the Enochian writer has Michael, part of that group of angels, in his head, just like 71:3 said that Michael took Enoch by his hand and showed him around heaven, and the one who took Enoch on a tour of heaven, which is why I'm going to argue that the he in verse 14 that came and greeted Enoch was Michael still, just like before, and was the one who was talking to Michael and said someone else was the Son of Man. This is 100% solidified because this is not the correct translation of verse 14b. The now 100% accepted reading says, You, Enoch, are the that Son of Man who was born for righteousness, and righteousness dwells on you. And the righteousness of the head of days will not forsake you. This difference in translation makes Enoch the Son of Man figure. Other than widespread scholastic acceptance, is that R.H. Charles himself admits that he did not translate it properly. Where there's markings in thick type are amended by him and not the original wording. And 71:14b is one that he indicated that he amended. And at the bottom of this page, he footnoted this, that the original text reads, "You are, and forsake you not." He changed it from the original second person tense to the third person tense. So, since Enoch is denoted as the messianic Son of Man figure and was taken by Michael into heaven and shown around, is that Michael is definitely not the Son of Man figure from Daniel 7:13, who was identified as Enoch in the text. So here is your complete Michael profile in 1 Enoch. There is nothing in the entire book that equates him with the promised Messiah. He is grouped together with other angels all the time and is referred to as one of the 7 watchers / archangels in the text. Now the fact that Enoch is referred to as the Son of Man is that this tells us that the book of parables was not composed by a Christian after the New Testament period. No Christian would refer to Enoch as the Son of Man over Jesus. It's just not going to happen. So, because of this, and the fact that Jude tied together 2 Enochian verses from 2 different sections, and that Enoch 1:9 is attested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is that the parable section was composed prior to the time of Jesus and the New Testament period. And this leads us to conclude that Jude was using 1 Enoch as a source in his epistle. Now, I can already hear the objections and questions in people's heads out there on this, so I'll answer them. Number 1 is that this does not make 1 Enoch scripture, nor does this invalidate Jude's status as inspired scripture. Using non-canonical source material does not mean that we go throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as both testaments are filled with verses referring to non-canonical sources. You see this a lot with 1 Kings, 1 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles is packed with different source material that the chronicler referred to in his works. You even have the book of Esther referring to chronicles of the Medes and Persians as source material, and Nehemiah has one reference as well. In the New Testament, we get this as well, namely with Paul. Paul, in 3 separate occasions, quoted Greek poets. Here with the Athenians, then with the Corinthians, and also with Titus. I couldn't find a primary source quote for this one, but all camps note the same reference to Epimenides. Also in 2 Timothy 3:8, it refers to Jannes and Jambres as the Egyptian magicians. But, as you can see, is that they are not named in the Exodus narrative. So, where did Paul get their names from? Well, there are a few possibilities. Number 1 is that the Damascus document from the Dead Sea Scrolls does mention Jannes. So it tells us that this tradition of their names predates the New Testament. Other options are the Apocryphon of Jannes and Jambres, and Origen said that this is where Paul got their names from. Then you can see that there were other sources that mention Jannes and Jambres by name as well. Bottom line is, if Paul found this acceptable, then we should too. He also cited the life of Adam and Eve, an apocryphal work that describes Satan coming as an angel of light and also the term third heaven, where we today would simply think of this as heaven. This is twice found in the Greek version of the life of Adam and Eve. Interesting thing is that the Slavonic translation refers to an archangel named Joel. And in Hebrews 11:37 is that it is very likely that the writer here is using the ascension of Isaiah in reference to Isaiah being sawed in half by Manasseh. That story is not recorded in the Old Testament, nor is there any story of any prophet being sawn in half. So, this is likely where the Hebrews writer is getting it from. So, when we see these direct connections in 2 Peter 2:4 to 1 Enoch chapters 10 and 20, is that we should not get unnerved by it. For 1 Peter 3:19 through 20 is that this can then be better understood after one compares it with the Enoch's story of similar descent in chapters 12 through 16. So, when it comes to Jude 14 through 15, is that you have to simply come to terms with the reality that Jude was sourcing 1 Enoch in his epistle. And you have early church writers saying that he did this and were okay with it. Tertullian, in the late 2nd century to the 3rd or mid-3rd century, saw 1 Enoch as scripture himself and said that it was sourced in the book of Jude. Clement of Alexandria, in roughly the same time period, said that the fact that Jude quotes Enoch verifies the prophecy as being true. He also mentioned that this is why the book of Jude was heavily debated on whether or not it's really inspired scripture, because it contained a pseudepigraphal work like 1 Enoch. Augustine, in his most famous work, The City of God, said that we cannot deny that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, left some divine writings, for this is asserted by the Apostle Jude in his canonical epistle. And Jerome, in his work on the illustrious men, said of Jude that, because in it Jude quotes from the apocryphal book of Enoch, it is rejected by many. He also discusses this in his commentary on Titus too. So, the early church was unanimous that Jude used 1 Enoch. And just to let you know, John MacArthur even says, yes, it's obvious now that everyone sees that Jude did source 1 Enoch. And as we have seen, that this is also the case in verse 6 with the fallen watchers who abandoned their place in heaven, procreated with women in the pre-flood world, and are currently held in prison in Tartarus, i.e. the abyss. So, what's the big long-winded point here? It's that Jude's angelology matches that of 1 Enoch, and as such, that Jude 9's reference to Michael the archangel does not mean that he, Michael, is the only archangel, as we have seen there are others described this way in 1 Enoch. The book of Tobit and other Second Temple Jewish material refers to other archangels, just like we saw with the Greek and Slavonic versions of the life of Adam and Eve. You will also find this in 2 Enoch, which is regarded by most as a 1st century Jewish or even potentially 1st century Christian book, because there's debating issue around it as well. And also in the Testament of Levi, that is a Jewish work as well. And some of this material and concepts line up perfectly with Revelation 8, where 7 angels are said to be standing before God as they are about to receive the 7 trumpets. And Revelation 20's binding of Satan for 1,000 years. The angel isn't named that did the binding here, but there's a good case that can be made that Michael got the nod in the same manner as he did in Jude 9 and Revelation 12:7 to go head-to-head with Satan. Additionally, Jude 9's story about the dispute over Moses' body is recognized as coming from the apocryphal book of the Assumption of Moses. And Clement of Alexandria, in the same section as before with 1 Enoch, says that Jude confirms the Assumption of Moses story as well. All of this and all other Second Temple and early church writings shows that Jude 9's reference to Michael was never connected to Jesus. Okay, but what about 1 Thessalonians 4:16? It says Jesus is coming with the voice of the archangel. What the equator is trying to do is put emphasis on the word the, as if this proves there is no plurality of archangels. Again, we have already seen the consensus view from varying Jewish groups was that there were multiple archangels in their mind that were also known as the Watchers from Daniel 4. That included Michael. And the other reason why the word the is not a big deal is because this isn't the only way to translate this clause as seen in the ESV, Berean Study, and Berean Literal Translations. The indefinite article can be used as the New English Translation Bible notes that neither noun in this phrase has the Greek article in front of it. So, if Paul didn't use the article, then it's very likely he didn't want us to think that of it in this manner. And this perfectly lines up contextually with Matthew 24:31 and Revelation 8:2 with angels coming at the day of the Lord with sounds of trumpets. So, 1 Thessalonians 4:16's clauses aren't descriptions of Christ, but of who else and what else will accompany his return, just as described in Matthew 24 and is found in the book of Revelation. Now, all that we have left in our Michael study is Revelation 12:7's war in heaven. Truth be told is that this context has often buffaloed a lot of commentators, and a lot of it stems around one's eschatology and angelology. But what I will say is that it's not that hard when you diagram the events out verse by verse, starting with that verses 2 and 5 clearly deal with Jesus' birth. The woman is pregnant and bears a man-child that is to rule the world. This is definitely about Jesus because before and after this, we know Jesus is the one to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Then, verse 5 finishes saying that the child was caught up unto God to sit on his throne. This is clearly describing Jesus' ascension after his resurrection. So, we have 3 clear historical points laid out to work from here, and more importantly, we know where Jesus is located in all of these. Ooh, I bet you might already know where I'm going to go with this. Now look at verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Long story short is that the woman represents faithful Israel. It's not about Mary. Mary is obviously the chosen woman in the Nativity story to bring forth the Messiah. But here, this is about faithful Israel. There's no point in the Bible or any other church writing where Mary goes and flees into the wilderness for 3.5 years. And John is clearly grabbing this from Isaiah 66, 7 through 8, where Zion is the one who brings forth the man-child. Now, what about verses 1, 3, and 4? Well, verse 1 is celestial language that uses the Virgo constellation in association with Jesus' conception and birth from a virgin. So, there are no new events to chart here. Now, verses 3 and 4. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Now I'm sure everyone has been taught, or has heard, that this is the description that describes 1/3 of the angels rebelling with Satan prior to Adam and Eve's fall. I'm sorry, but that is simply not biblically accurate. That is simply a church tradition passed on because nothing in this context alludes to pre-creation or pre-fall contexts or worlds. What it does have is a clear connection to Jesus' birth, saying that the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And this matches Herod's massacre of the innocent in his attempt to kill the King of the Jews, Jesus Christ. And this makes a lot of sense since verses 3 and 4 come between 2 and 5. There's zero reason to rewind the clock back at verses 3 and 4 to pre-fall times in the text. Again, that is church tradition, yanking it out of context and applying it to a story that nowhere else in the Bible describes such an event of 1/3 of angels rebelling in a pre-flood world or pre-fall world with Satan. This is the only place in the entire Bible where 1/3 and angels are used in association with each other. But most know that 1/3 is used a lot with things that are said to be destroyed or killed in Revelation chapters 8 and 9. This is another clue that we should not remove 12:4 away from Revelation's context, which is in verse 3 describes the dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and this is connected to the beast who has 7 heads and 10 horns that chapter 17 picks up on as well. And I really hope that everyone knows that the 10 horns is Daniel's 7 language of the 4th empire, whereas the 7 heads are the previous empires conglomerated together into the 4th beast, as Revelation 13:2 describes the 4th beast having the previous beast's attributes. The bottom line is that Rome is the 4th empire as stated from Josephus, John, and Jesus. There's just no way of getting around it other than simply by avoiding the text, the context, and recorded history of 4 successive empires from starting with Babylonians down to Rome. So, verses 3 and 4 events are tied to the same period in time, that of with Jesus' birth. Now, you're likely asking, what does verse 4 describe then about the dragon sweeping a third of the stars and casting them to the earth if it's not that rebellion story that I've always believed in? Well, it's really not that hard to understand when you take a look at both verbs in other verses in the New Testament. Saru is used 5 times in the New Testament, and the other time by John in John 21:8, with the apostles dragging the net filled with fishes back to the shore. Did the fish want to get dragged to the shore? No. And the point here is that we see a forceful act being done by one party to another. The 3 other places are all found in Acts. Acts 8 with Saul persecuting the church. Acts 14 with Paul being stoned nearly to death and him being dragged out of the city and left for dead. And Acts 17 with some Jews attacking Jason's house and bringing Jason and other believers before the rulers of the city. Each of these contexts were clear description of a forceful attack by one party against the other one, which takes us to our second word, balo. This should be familiar and easy with Revelation 2:10, saying that the devil is going to cast some in the Smyrna church into prison. Or about how Jesus says that he will cast Jezebel and others with her into great tribulation. The action is clearly forceful in both verses. And guess what? Balo comes up a lot in Revelation 12 with Satan and his angels being casted out of heaven and into the earth in verse 9. So, all 3 words conclusively show that Satan is the one on the assault here against the stars of heaven. And if you're still needing one more proof that I'm right about this, is that Revelation 12:4 is reminiscent of Daniel 8:10's little horn that is said to cast some of the host and of the stars to the ground. So, the description here is Satan having a war in heaven and successfully beating down a third of the good angels in heaven to earth. Well, geez, why does that sound so familiar to that of verse 7's war in heaven? It's because verse 4 and 7 are parallel accounts of the same event. And even though Satan and his angels could defeat a third of the good angels in this war, that is far from a majority, which is why verse 8 says that they prevailed not, and verse 9 explains their expulsion from heaven to earth. Now, what confirms this is that verses 4 and 7 are parallel accounts, is the time reference in verse 6 for 1,260 days. This describes the woman, i.e. Israel, fleeing into the wilderness where God protects and nourishes her there. But guess what? We have the exact same description in verse 14. And both of these are equal to 3.5 years with a time, times, and half a time coming from Daniel 7:25's little horn of the fourth empire that gets tagged to 1,290 days in Daniel 12:11, whereas John referred to the same period 2 times as 42 months and 2 times as 1,260 days, all of which are referring to 3.5 years. And there is 0 reason to convert the days into years using the day-year formula SDAs. When Daniel and John express the same length in days, months, and years, and use the term phrase times referring to the one normal calendrical year, is that there is 0 basis for doing anything more with the numbers. Stop fiddling with the authors that God chose to use to write his inspired work. So, Since verses 6 and 14 parallel one another, then so do verses 4 and 7, which means that the war in heaven between Michael and Satan took place while Jesus was on the earth. And this provides us with the reason for Michael being described as fighting with his angels, as he was left in charge of the heavenly army once Jesus became incarnate on earth. This definitively shows that Michael and Jesus are two completely different beings. So, to all the equators out there, it's time to expunge this bad teaching that you have bought into for far too long. Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.